All right. Good day, everybody. Thank you for joining APQC's webinar, Emerging Practices for Provisioning Knowledge Directly with Technical Workflows and Environments. I want to start off this call with a couple of housekeeping items. As a reminder, audio is available through your computer speakers or dial-in lines, and all attendee lines are muted. Now, you can see the Q&A tool located here on the right. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them here, and we'll answer the questions at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a copy of the slides as well as the recording in the next couple of days. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Craig Brown is an experienced executive consultant with demonstrated history of working in the automotive industry. Craig is skilled in product lifecycle management, systems engineering, product development, application lifecycle management, and computer-aided engineering. He is, as a PLM elder, he's always looking for ways to help others with their PLM and ALM challenges to improve product innovation, speed, and quality. Jeff Moffa is a board member of the International Knowledge Aware Association and the CEO and president of Auros Knowledge Systems. Jeff has over 15 years of experience with the knowledge aware approach and has been one of the primary contributors to the concept of knowledge aware. Prior to Auros Knowledge Systems, Jeff worked at the Ford Motor Company in the Advanced Manufacturing Technology Development Organization, leading several design automation and knowledge systems projects. And finally, Jeff Mayhew is the chief engineer at Navistar. Jeff is responsible for implementing ergonomics at Navistar and is in charge of the Auros implementation there as well. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand it over to you, Jeff, to talk to us about knowledge aware.
Alrighty, thank you, Holly. Let me go ahead and start to share. Okay, so as Holly mentioned, I am going to be giving an overview. Well, let me just move this out of the way. Of the knowledge-aware approach for provisioning technical knowledge and a general approach for managing knowledge. So to explain what this approach is and why it's an important change, let's talk about the way knowledge is traditionally managed in technical environments. Okay, so most technical and engineering process or companies have a process by which they create content or manufacture goods, and that process has key decisions, milestones in the process, and to support that process in terms of knowledge management, we tend to start to write stuff down, right? So maybe you have some Excel files that list some manufacturing standards, and those files are copied. There's some design standards that have been written down, and they're in PDF, in a repository somewhere. And maybe some design checklists that refer to both of these documents. Some CAD rules that drive CAD in a database. Lessons learned silos somewhere else. And you get the idea. And we're writing stuff down, and they're maybe electronic now, but there's not a lot of connectivity or associativity amongst them, and they're definitely not tied to the engineering process in a real meaningful way. So consequently, what has to happen is when there's a team or an engineering person or technical person that needs the expertise, the collective wisdom of the company, they're asked to go search, right? And searching is problematic because they're returning different forms, different Word versus document versus database. And they're burdened, cognitively loaded by, trying to assimilate all this information, all these copies of information. What's the right source? How do they relate to each other? And there's certainly no connection back to the decision that was made, or at least at best, a very weak one. What knowledge actually drove which decision, right? Which copy of which file was used and in what sequence? So that's not a great user experience. And we call this the library model, this traditional approach. And why do we do that? Because that's what we know. That's the common wisdom. it's kind of build it, put it on the bookshelf, and people will find it kind of mentality. But we're all comfortable with it, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're comfortable because that's where we came from. That's the metaphor that we all understand. But things have indeed changed, and the way we can provision knowledge or change the way knowledge is managed is at a hand. And the way to explain this is the knowledge-aware concept. And in the International Knowledge Aware Association has developed a definition. I'll read it here. It's a comprehensive approach to continuously collect, deliver, and actively apply trusted knowledge within the flow of work. That's a mouthful, and it's saying a lot, but there's a lot in there. And the way the Knowledge Aware Association likes to explain what this really important difference is to the library model is this way. In the old days, I'm old enough to remember these things, when you were in a new city, we appreciated having a map, right? A map is like everything that's been written down about that city. It's all possible turns, right? And then it relies on copies, just like our current process of, libraries. There's lots of copies of documents, and the documents are out of date. We don't know what's relevant to what we are doing. But right now, there's a different model for consuming map information that's emerged. We're all used to it now. It's called navigation. So while there's a lot of differences here, I'll point out a couple that are important. One is in navigation, there's a device, a cell phone that senses context, and the bits of the map that are interesting to you are provisioned as it's needed, right? So you're not seeing all possible turns, right? That's one huge difference, right? Just what I need when I need it based on my context. Two is there's a trust, right? I'm not worried about this as an old copy of a map. It's the latest because it's been provisioned from a gold source. That's two. And third, and probably the most important, is that my interaction with the map is more than me reading it. The system understands what I'm doing, how fast I'm driving, which turns I take, which helps the system to develop insights like traffic, like estimated time of arrival. You can't do that with a passive map. So what we're saying here is that the old library method, we need to do the same thing to transform it to the new way that paper maps, the navigation did to paper maps. So the new way, what we're going to do to start down this knowledge aware journey is we're going to manage the knowledge directly in the same way that a map manages the information on a map. The individual map tiles and its metadata allow it to be managed directly, and the model of the roads that's on it are managed directly. And get rid of all the document bloat and copies and all that extra effort that doesn't provide value, and manage knowledge as a granular, modular, actionable unit of knowledge that the knowledge aware approach calls a knowledge packet. So we're going to manage knowledge packets instead of documents. It's the biggest thing here, right? And these granular, modular, actionable units. Let's take it a little step further. So it's more than just capturing knowledge in knowledge packets. Really, there's a process that knowledge aware talks about. And I think most of you that are interested in knowledge management will appreciate this, that there's a process, a closed loop learning process that's associated with knowledge aware. So let's take a look at that. Let's start by looking at knowledge capture. And again, people who are steeped in knowledge management should be somewhat feel good about this, because knowledge aware says that knowledge should be a bottom-up process, not a top-down process. Communities of practice, those kinds of things, right? Where communities are directed at managing and communicating with their constituencies through these knowledge packets. So I'm just going to show you some images of a software version of a knowledge packet so that you get an idea. Again, granular, modular, actionable units of knowledge that are very much done. The disaggregation of map is the same into tiles, is the same thing we're doing here with knowledge. We're disaggregating it into these granular, modular, actionable units. And one interesting outcome of having a knowledge packet is that, when you're gathering data about what people are doing with them, you can produce insights like the traffic, like ETA and maps. And this is a health characteristic. The system can produce a derivative analytic that says we're confident in the quality of this knowledge packet, or it may degrade. So we call this a vitality of an individual knowledge packet. And I'll show you a couple other pictures here. Here's one with a slightly different model associated with it. they can be process models. And so these are 3 individual knowledge packets. So the communities of practice, they're self-governing, bottom up, can create knowledge packets. The next part of the process is to provision that knowledge. So in the knowledge-aware ideal, knowledge isn't searched for, it's provisioned. So the context of a process, of a product, of a work product is understood, and then we can provision the knowledge accurately, the knowledge packets from multiple communities, multiple stakeholders, and then activate that knowledge in the process itself through a second kind of concept that we call an assessment control. So the assessment control is like the nav app that's on your phone, right? It's not the information, but it's the system that is sensing context, right? And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you some pictures of an assessment control. An assessment control is a series of tools and technologies that process and activate individual knowledge packets. So we've just provisioned knowledge packets, and here each row in this assessment control is a knowledge packet that's been provisioned, and it's a little beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today, but now the assessment controls allows us to interact with each of these knowledge packets on a very connected way, right? And so that's what a knowledge packet, and communicate back to the stakeholders, the communities that authored each of these knowledge packets. But an assessment control can change what it looks like depending on what kind of knowledge it is. Here's a parameter view of an assessment control, and here is what we call a method view of an assessment control. So if the knowledge is process oriented, you may be executing and tracking a process. If it's model based, it may be a parameter sheet. If it's attribute based, it may be something like the first one, which we call a line item sheet. Interact very actively with the knowledge, right? And we're going to activate that from within the flow. And the last step now is the assessment control is also gathering data about how that knowledge was used, and then we create statistics and analytics that help us learn and adapt. And in the knowledge-aware process, we call these things learning opportunities. And the learning opportunity that's derived from this data is then presented to a learning cycle, which then produces new learning at the community level. So knowledge aware is fundamentally a closed loop process that's enabled by these 2 technologies, a knowledge packet and an assessment control. Alrighty, so just another way of looking at the same thing. So knowledge aware has it that the team or an individual, whatever the process is, has a requirement to gather or to know about what the company knows, right? So engineering standards, manufacturing standards, requirements, whatever the knowledge is, there's a requirement there. And what we're going to do, instead of asking them to search, we're going to provision these knowledge units, these granular, modular, actionable units of knowledge called knowledge packets, into the assessment control, where the team is then able to process and to interact with that knowledge and track what happens. And then as context change, as assumptions change, we do this throughout the process. Right? This is just a different view of the same concept. So what we're saying, and hopefully the panelists today will agree through their own journeys and observation, is that at least in terms of technical memory of engineering knowledge or technical knowledge in general, and process knowledge, the library model will not get you to where we're going with knowledge management. Its inability to connect with the directly and activated within the engineering process just doesn't work. Better search engine doesn't capture knowledge efficiently because it's just relying on search, and it certainly doesn't activate it and connect it to the decisions that are made. Okay, so with the knowledge aware approach, it's different. We're going to have or create knowledge packets and provision them into the assessment control uniformly across all kinds of different processes. So there's a single methodology to capture and share knowledge that's not silo based. A giant SharePoint repository, maybe one repository, but the silos within SharePoint can be very, very hard to bridge. With knowledge aware, those obstacles go away. Okay, so real quick, finish up here. There's some motherhood and apple pie kinds of benefits of doing knowledge aware. I don't have to get into them, but the one that's less intuitive is the last one, and that we find and can report data and real observations is that the knowledge aware takes these repositories of knowledge and unifies them, and actually takes the number of IT systems that people use and reduces them. And that's the footprint that we see. So that was a very quick, packed overview of knowledge aware, and I'll turn it over to our panelists to discuss what their observations on this process. Okay. All right, so we got a different presentation here that we're going to go through and bring both Craig and Jeff back into the mix here. Oops. So, Craig, Jeff, tell us about yourself and how you became interested in knowledge aware at your organization.
Well, I'll go first. It was my job. Let me explain. So as I moved through my different assignments at General Motors, one of the ones I picked up about almost 2 decades ago was this responsibility for knowledge-based engineering applications. So these are applications in the CAD world that help the designer of a mechanical part do their job quicker. And I found out some of it was automated, and I asked, well, how did they automate it? And the next thing I know, we're talking to you, Jeff, and a few others. And so in a particular part of the business that was really mature at what they did, they had already done some design automation using knowledge from knowledge packets. And that's how I became aware of it. And then I became interested why it was in a separate tool. And we'll talk more about the rest of it.
Jeff, how about you?
Yeah, so unlike Craig, this wasn't my job to begin with. I work at Navistar, which is a leading manufacturer of heavy trucks and tractors in North America. My background actually is in human factors and ergonomics. I was in our ergonomics team in 2013 when Auros was made available to our organization, and our team was responsible for defining all of the criteria and requirements around the ergonomic aspects of these vehicles. And we had a lot written down in Word documents, Excel files, PowerPoint, and so on. And at the time, we were experiencing all of the typical failure modes associated with attempting to manage knowledge in documents. If people, our engineers in the organization wouldn't find what they were looking for, or wouldn't search for them, or found them and then saved them to their desktop. And then either way, our team still had to get pulled in and get involved in the process. So we had a very inefficient process. So what we did was started breaking down our documents into knowledge packets to get them into the flow of work. And for me anyway, after seeing the power of this knowledge aware approach, which we'll discuss in more detail, actually changed roles in the organization to further the rollout at Navistar.
All right, thank you guys. And the next question. So, Craig, you have multiple roles now, but in your role at General Motors, when you take this one first as well, describe, the current footprint of knowledge aware at your organization. And do we have some supporting slides here? I think we do.
Yeah, you got to go down 2.
Oh, can you go? Can we
back
skip
up 1? But I'll go ahead. So
yeah, go ahead.
So, well, first a reminder to the audience, I did leave General Motors as a retiree almost 2 years ago now. But one of my colleagues is still there. And in fact, Wendy, who leads this area of the business, she's still there. And they love chatting with anybody about their progress. One of the subject matter experts, Nicole Nichols, presented at Jeff's conference a few months ago about the progress in the area of seats. And so just let me summarize for you that I saw, and part of my job as the PLM leader, so that was after the KBE job, was to no kidding, get rid of all the silos, or get rid of some of the silos at least. And so the graphic there shows you the kinds of things we were able to decommission and bring that into this knowledge aware and knowledge packets. And then the various workflows, and what you'll see about the workflows is they're all about integration points, whether they're design reviews or making sure best practices were followed, they're all about that kind of a thing that are integral when you're trying to bring separate groups of people, whether it be disciplines like mechanical engineering or electrical engineering, or even different parts of those disciplines like wiring and electronics, or bodies and chassis or blocks, right? Some things you make by bending metal, some things you make by molding it, whether that be iron or plastic, and some things you make by taking a block of raw material and milling it, right? And so the best practices, even the manufacturing approach, is part of your corporate knowledge that's maybe your competitive advantage. And so I think what surprised me most about this footprint is, I came with a control system background. I'm an aerospace engineer with an emphasis on flight controls. And how did I get to the car company? Well, it was about embedded computers and controlling cars. And so now the question was, well, how do you keep integrating all this stuff? Well, I think these integration points, especially design reviews, we also call them peer reviews. It's really important to bring the knowledge from the parallel programs or from the past programs to bear at just the right time for the design review. I liked Jeff's picture about the old library. If you spent all your time searching through the library, well, that's important, and that's the way it worked when it was all paper-based. You don't spend your time thinking about failure modes and how to make the product more robust. Instead, you're spending your time searching. One of the things I tried to do as the PLM leader was search these repositories more efficiently. And then when people said, well, we got to get out of our legacy IT system because it's old technology that the supplier no longer supports, where do we go? Well, for one answer was go to the ALM system. Another answer was go to the PLM system. A third answer was, no, how should we manage knowledge in the future? And what Jeff summarized is managing it like CAD pieces, managing it like knowledge pieces is what I found people really embraced. And that's interesting to me because as the PLM leader, I was trying to move us forward. I wasn't trying to be a dictator, though the comment they captured there is it's at least entertaining, right? I tried and I was trying to be a good corporate leader and saying we ought to get to one system. And what was amazing to me was the amount of pushback I got over and over because it was either too difficult to author or too difficult to apply. By apply, I mean everything. Share it, find it, use it, put it in context. So we tried many times, and some of them are listed here, and we ended up in Auros instead because it was just a better place. And it's all about user acceptance. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, and Jeff, how about your footprint? I think we need to regress one slide.
Yeah, so at Navistar around 2013, when we started with Auros, our organizational emphasis was around having a single gold source for all of our technical knowledge. If we learn something through the course of our process, if we make a mistake and then we learn best practice or design practice to avoid that in the future, where does it go? And before that, when we asked the question, where does it go, we got a lot of different answers. SharePoint, this system, that system, and so on. So we had some understanding that we needed a single centralized system. Once we started capturing our knowledge and converting documentation into knowledge packets, the use of those knowledge packets through assessment controls was a natural next step. We started in our product development organization that had roughly 1,500 engineers. So the first application was an engineering design review. Everyone was doing design reviews. We had all the knowledge packets. Why wouldn't we apply them in the flow of work and track the conformance to those knowledge packets through assessments? Once that was in place and people gradually started using it, we had organic growth of the system and of the knowledge aware process in the organization. So that lended itself to why don't we use these for a design verification plan? Well, that's in this other system. So we would find the knowledge that's in the other tool, incorporate it, adapt our assessment workflows, and so on. So as that process repeated itself over the course of a number of different years, you can see that at the moment we have at least 10 distinct workflows that are incorporated inside of the tool, from early to middle to late in an engineering process. We've also have been able to decommission at least 3 different IT systems, so they're just unplugged, the links are gone. We do it in a new system now. And overall, we have over 2,500 distinct users. So currently, the footprint of Auros and Navistar is being used by all of our product development organization and starting to be used by groups that are outside of product development, but interfacing with our workflows. So honestly, this just continues to grow in the organization as we find further knowledge silos that can be incorporated into Auros and streamlined.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. And I have to tell everybody that there was a slide in this deck that showed my company, Auros, and the way we use our own software. And we have 30 workflows that use Auros, from hiring people. We do the knowledge-aware approach to information security management auditing. We do that in our software. So we are very much eat our own cake, so to speak. Okay, moving on. If we can go down a couple slides, we'll go to the next question for the panel. So, you know, in being the role that I have both at the Knowledge-Aware Association, International Knowledge-Aware Association, and as well as, you know, president of Auros Knowledge Systems, probably the biggest question I get is, I don't know if my organization is going to create knowledge packets. That seems hard. And the answer, I think, is, you know, a little too good to be true that it's not, but there's certainly a getting going process. So Jeff, or who's anyone want to take this question? What was it like to create knowledge packets in your organization?
Yeah, so for us right now, it's not a difficult process at all. It's ingrained into a number of our key workflows. You know, back in 2013, when we were first introducing the very concept to people, we had to expose engineering to the concept and then incentivize folks to write knowledge packets, take some documentation, break it down, and start to get it used. But once you get the knowledge into the flow of work, what we found was people got a general understanding that a knowledge packet could be used to prevent a repeated mistake and things of that nature. And then honestly, the system, it became a virtuous cycle, and the system took off on its own. So at this point, with it incorporated into key workflows, it's just the way that people communicate specifics and communicate expectations between different teams.
Great. Craig, Jim has a lot of knowledge packets, so you want to add anything that Jeff said?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's always interesting when people like me ask this question. Is it difficult to do something with some editor, right? And I think it comes from years of being underwhelmed, frankly, by tool vendors that bring some great new thing, and then they just say, as long as you press the mouse button 49 times in the right order, you can get what you want. And you know, I'm exaggerating, but the point is that's what leads to this question. And so I think you got to remember, everybody, you're doing knowledge management now somehow. Either you got the gray-haired guy like me sitting in the corner who gets to go to all the reviews, or you got a librarian who tells you where all the knowledge is, even that stuff you did 40 years ago. And you know, somewhere in between is what really happens. So what I like about your cycle, Jeff, is this activate phase, right? If you start there and ask your people, well, how do you use knowledge? You know, and where do you find it? And how hard is it to find? And how hard is it to apply? Then you find out people, you know, we call them peer reviews. They also do a read across review, which is a variation of that. The ability to look at, in the same context, 2 different products at slightly different times in their product development and ask risk management questions. Are we going to make it? Are we going to hit this key requirement? Well, let's check the knowledge packets that can, you know, that are associated with that. The more you look at those events, the more the utilization and then the updating reauthoring, if you will. The easier that is, the more people like it. And it is organic growth. Once people use it a little bit, they're like, oh, I want to apply this to other things. I think the other thing I'd remind you is words are important. And so what is a knowledge packet? So you've done a good job defining it. Let me ask a different question. What's a requirement? And lots of people think everything is a requirement, and that can't be true, right? And so requirements are things that discriminate a product one from another, right? Whether it be performance requirement or whether it be a regulation or whatever. A lot of other things are constraints. You must design it this way so we can mass produce it at 100,000 a year, right? Or whatever the numbers are. And so distinguishing between requirements and knowledge, or constraints and requirements, that was a clue for me. And the more of the constraint stuff ended up in knowledge packets. We do it this way because, right? And, there was research done on the different car companies, and some of the best books are about the Toyota way. And one of the things you all learn about that is distilling knowledge down to one piece of paper, what you now call packet, is really important to get the organization to be speedy. And so at least in the car business, the truck business, anything that's got mass production and very similar products, the ability to share knowledge packets is really important. And kind of the measure of success is that they're consumable. You can read it in 5 minutes, you can apply it in another 10 minutes, and then you can make a decision, right? It's not something that, oh, it's a 50-page report and it takes a week to get through it and all this other stuff. So consumable, how you active, updating it, the rest is easy.
Yeah, I'd like to tag on one other thought, observation about the organizations that I see embracing knowledge, where knowledge packet creation isn't a problem. And one of the key observations is that once the experts or the holders of knowledge realize that this is a better way to communicate with the teams and the stakeholders and the design teams themselves, and it saves them time. You write emails because you expect someone will read it. If you tell someone to put it in a lessons learned database and then it's lost, there's no incentive there. But with knowledge aware and the flow, the activation and the provisioning, it's visible to see this flow and get the feedback. It becomes a mode of communication, not something else somebody does.
Right.
It's a value added activity instead of something I've been told to do, right? And I think that has something to do with why it becomes fairly easy.
Yeah, you push and pull systems, right? It's a pull system, right? And so many of our systems today are push systems. Well, I put it in the library, go find it, right? No. You want the other way. You want it to be a pull system. I want to say, oh, I'm at this point in the program. I need to know stuff related to fasteners for engine blocks. Show me the knowledge packets, right? And so it's just a mindset. And we're going to talk about benefits in a little bit, but the big benefit is speed, right? Speed without losing quality. So anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And to go back to something you said before about requirements versus knowledge, there's a big, there's a lot in knowledge aware about how those two relate to each other. Maybe APQC will let us do another webinar on that topic alone.
Okay.
Let's move on to the next question. So, I think, Craig, this one is kind of down your, right down your lane here, because it's a PLM kind of question. And where do you think, this is another question we get a lot as well when we talk to, people who are interested in knowledge aware as a process. But where do you think it fits into the PLM portfolio?
Well, the PLM should be the original picture you showed about the whole life cycle of a product and some key milestones and everything associated with that. So I liked your bubble chart with all those different artifacts, right? So part of the problem is, what is PLM to you, right? And I think people need to understand it should be really broad. It's product lifecycle management. There's a reason it's called that, and it's broad. Okay, so then the portfolio of tools to manage products across their lifecycle is really important, that you know how you're managing your knowledge. You learn all the time. You learn from the field, you learn from a manufacturing process. If you go into a new market, you learn something new about its performance characteristics that maybe wasn't present in your current market. And so this knowledge management and what you call knowledge aware, it's a key element of any portfolio system. So if your current PDM vendors can't support it, then you need to figure out how to integrate it, right? And one of the ways we chose to integrate it at GM was building a Google-like search capability. It's not Google at all, it's something else. But we coined it Smart Search, and one of the first things we searched after the CAD and release data was the knowledge data, so that we could tie it all together. And now people naturally put it all together because they know about it, right? KBE applications that I mentioned originally help that. So let me give you one other problem, and this is kind of a PLM legacy problem, but it goes to your point about where does it fit in the portfolio. You know, PDM, product data management, started out with let's manage the files that were the CAD files that eventually go into an assembly. And PLM at various places, and certainly the think tanks, they define PLM to be really broad, like I said before. It's the product, it's its life cycle, and it's the management of all of that. So if PLM is really broad, but PDM is just files for CAD data, then there's a lot of other portfolio stuff that needs to be done in order to have a successful product. And I think that's how it fits into the portfolio is it's a missing piece. You know, your notion about first authoring it and then activating it, you know, how you provision it, these are really good words that don't fit into the, well, where's the CAD file and how do I put it in the assembly, right? Or where's the piece of software that controls the fuel sensor and in turn activates the fuel pump, right? There's knowledge about fuel pumps and where they're located, and there's regulations you have to follow and all this other stuff that isn't easy to do if you have to attach it to a physical part or to a physical piece of software. Think about when you create those. You create them during product development. Well, when did you create the knowledge? Well, you created it some other time. You learned it somewhere else. And so when you start to look at PLM as being the whole product for its whole life cycle, there's this notion back to the library, only except you want the library to be active. You want the library to help you find data, right? We all remember growing up, at least I do, and I'm older than you guys, those Star Trek things where you just asked the computer a question and it gave you the answer, right? We're close to that right now. We really are. I mean, the Googles of the world and so on with Alexa and the next thing can bring you what you asked for. Well, knowledge should be the same way, right? And even knowledge between Jeff and I's company, Jeff Mayhew, right? I mean, we're going to learn stuff about automating road traffic and automating vehicles down the road. In fact, I think the truckers will do it before the car guys, right? We're going to want to share that knowledge with each other. Well, it would be cool if there's a way to have knowledge packets that are consumable by both of us about autonomous driving. How safe it is, where it works really well, like Interstate 80 across the middle of the country, where it doesn't work so well, like downtown London, the map picture you showed earlier. And why is that? Well, because it's just more complicated, that's why. And so I think PLM portfolios have to have a way, a plan for managing knowledge and making it active. Active means it comes to you, not that you go find it. It's just there. And so that's where it fits. Now, how do we make it all work? Well, that's a topic for another day, and that's why I retired. It's too hard. No, I'm just joking, everybody.
Oh, it is. Yeah, and I think people define PLM in different ways too, and I think you presented a very broad idea of what PLM is. I think part of the problem with people moving forward with the knowledge-aware approach is they see PLM as the flavor of PLM or the vendor that's on-prem at their site, and the constraints that are placed into trying to fit it into just that.
You know, one of the things I did was to try to explain to people that were interested, but especially if they were the executives, and they say, well, why do we need this other thing? Why can't you, it's just another filing cabinet, isn't it? And I got them to talk about, well, how do you find it? And then how do you apply it? And then when you showed them examples of that, like these peer review things, they're like, wow, that's cool. I really need that all the time. Yeah, I know you do. That's why we're going to put it in the portfolio. And so, other people would say, we don't need that. It was really interesting. The people that use PDM, so the mechanical guys, they were one of the strongest advocates for knowledge aware. Why? Because we could build KBE apps faster. It was the time to market to build a little knowledge-based engineering app that could automatically build for you a particular thing. I don't want to get into the details because those are proprietary, but it was really interesting, right? We applied knowledge-aware packets to the integration problems. I'll leave it at that. One that's classic is a wiper, right? The windshield changes. You got to cover so much because it's a regulation, meaning remove so much snow or water. And we built a KBE app. Where did the rule come from? Came from knowledge aware, right? And so it's interesting that, to me, that you got to get the executives asking, why do I need another tool? Well, because the PDM vendors haven't really addressed it this way. They do have requirements management. They figure out how to manage stuff. They are a very good place to manage pieces, but applying it, putting it in an integrated system, as we talk more and more about systems engineering and all that stuff, it'll be interesting to see the melding of knowledge and systems engineering. It will happen. It has to happen.
In the interest of time, let's move on from there, but I could not agree more with that last statement. It's going to be very interesting as we get into that connection between requirements and knowledge. Okay, let's go on to the next question, please. Oh, this is the benefits question. I like this one a lot. Do either you gentlemen care to take a crack at this one?
I'll let Jeff go. It's his turn.
Yeah, I don't mind starting. So, rather than repeating your material from earlier, I'll just focus on one of them. One of the biggest benefits that I see is that knowledge aware and using knowledge packets improves the way that people capture knowledge in general. So when people are capturing knowledge through purely the library model of Word documents, PowerPoints, Excel files, it's really not designed to be reused. That knowledge capture process and documentation is more so designed to serve the person doing the capturing. But when you adopt a knowledge-aware approach, it forces you to focus on the user. Because you're provisioning the knowledge into the flow of work, it kind of forces you to think about, how is this knowledge going to be consumed, by whom, what do I want them to do with it, what workflow am I going to leverage this into? And this is just an entirely different mindset than if you just went through a development program and said, well, we're at the end of the program, let's just write down our lessons learned, which is a totally ineffective process. So knowledge aware and documenting knowledge packets that are designed to be provisioned into the flow of work really gets you to a level of precision and rigor that takes even the concept of documenting knowledge to begin with to another level. A lot of companies may think of capturing knowledge as just search-based or chat-based, or someone's about to leave the company, so I better interview them and capture everything they know. And not that these are totally invalid exercises, but the knowledge-aware approach of taking something and breaking it down into a format in which it can be used into the flow of work just really improves the format of the knowledge base that your organization has to begin with.
Well said.
The only thing I'd add to that is the really good companies, and Jeff and I are in different industries, but very similar companies. They always want a learning cycle, right? Whether it's after a spill in the marketplace, which is terrible, you don't want any of those, or after it's a troublesome launch where it didn't launch, the manufacturing launch, or it didn't launch as smoothly as you expected. These reviews that occur, the very first thing the chief and the executives above the chief ask for is, can you please make sure this learning gets applied to everybody else immediately? Well, by making the capture easy and then making the next peer review for all those other programs required to look at the knowledge, right? It's much better than a place where you write it in a report, and there's so many stories about these things. You write it in a report and nobody ever reads the report, but the report has the genuine piece of gold knowledge, right? The competitive advantage documented. So I would say the organizational benefits are the biggest one is it encourages cross-functional learning. It really does. And because it's fun to use and easy to use, as opposed to something a bit more onerous, it happens. So the organizational benefit is that it encourages the right culture, right? And you want this culture of continuous learning. Learning is only effective if you can apply it quickly. And you know, in competitive businesses like ours, it's really important to have that.
Okay. All right, we're down to, we want to save 10 minutes for question and answer. So I think we have one more question here. What would you recommend for an organization how to get started with knowledge aware? So Jeff, we have about 5 minutes. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, no problem. I should be able to stick to that time. Like a lot of these questions, it's something that you can answer in 5 minutes or an hour. But
Yeah.
basically, the way I look at this is for an organization to get started with knowledge aware. I mean, this is good because congratulations, you've already taken the first step, which is getting exposed to the concept and just understanding the fundamentals that this is a different model than the library and search approach. I would say the next step is to really look at what's going on inside of your organization, and then how do you want things to work differently, focusing on where the waste is and where your first kind of pilot or initiatives are. So basically, with that, you need to be clear about what particular problem in your organization you're trying to solve or what you want to be different. So for example, have I had repeat errors at this manufacturing plant in this particular point of the line? Or is the situation that I'm worried about this particular, maybe a regulatory department, a knowledge of its work processes if this tenured employee leaves? Or does this other area have information scattered on a number of different SharePoints that people are supposed to be using, but it's not really clear if they're using it, that sort of thing. So the first step really is getting exposed to the concept, understanding how this applies in your org, picking what problem you think you want to solve, where you want to start in. And then after that, obviously, next steps is, I'd say there's a lot of material available from the Auros Knowledge Systems team about how we can work together to come up with a solution to this problem. And Auros Knowledge Systems has a well-defined seed project process where even if you get the concept of knowledge aware in general and see broader applicability inside of your organization, you're not going to change everything at once. This is a real journey no matter your company's size. So the important thing is getting the idea, scoping out a small project and going from there.
Bottom up. It's not like PLM where everybody has to get on board all at once and you're changing it. You got a massive changeover process. It's really best adopted bottom up and grown organically. And I do think I can speak for, you know, as an external observer to the growth of knowledge aware at both of your companies, that the growth has been continuous and organic over, you know, from starting small and growing big. It started fairly at a decent size at General Motors, but it still has grown, you know, several times, several 100% since its inception. Okay, Craig, Jeff, thank you so much for answering these questions. I think now, you know, it's enough of the canned questions. Let's see if anybody who's attending the webinar may have some specific questions of you. Oh, before we get to that, can I just go over these resources? So Jeff mentioned there's a lot of other researchers out there. There is a white paper published by the International Knowledge Aware Association .org, as well as there's also a white paper from my company, Auros Knowledge Systems. You can find that white paper. It's a fairly heavy read, but it describes the process quite well. And the next slide, please. If you want a briefing from, at least from my company, we're more than happy to schedule some one time with you to give you an overview of the knowledge aware process. Okay, enough of that.
All right, well, thank you, gentlemen. That was a great presentation and a lively conversation. We have had some questions come in, and just as a note to everybody, please continue to put your questions in. If we don't address them now, I will be working with all three of these gentlemen to make sure your questions are answered, and we'll follow up with them. The first question that I've got up here is, would knowledge aware improve organizational scalability, and how?
Yes.
Well, yeah. As the smallest company in the group, I think I might be able to tell you unequivocally yes. So, yep, it was fairly early in our process as a company that we understood knowledge aware to be distinct from the software that we sell. The concept of capture, provision, activate, learn is, you know, a very typical learning cycle, but there's some meat on the bones here with knowledge aware and some very specific prescription on how to do that. So when a small company is growing, they're bringing on routine, and to be efficient, those routines need to be established and be efficient themselves. And what we found is that when we as a small company establish a practice, how are we going to implement a seed project? How are we going to engage a new customer? How are we going to implement information security management as we host? How are we going to hire new employees? Because we're growing, we need to hire new employees. These are routines that are made more efficient and knowledge enabled by applying the knowledge aware concepts to these processes. So in a very real, I mean, I don't know who asked that question, but you know, that's almost a softball here, because we as a company, my company, Auros Knowledge Systems, benefits from the knowledge aware process in that exact dimension of scalability.
All right. I would say I'm always a big fan of the intersection between knowledge and process in general. One without the other is just busy work, but you have to have both of them together to make things happen and help support the workers effectively executing. So, okay. All right, the next question we have is, with the use of multiple systems. So you've got your quality management systems, you have your PLM systems. How do you integrate these knowledge flows to ensure the prevention of recurrence actions are instilled in the knowledge documents? How do you integrate the workflows to ensure the prevention of reoccurrence actions and make sure they're instilled in the knowledge documents, I think is what the question is. So does that make sense?
It does.
All right.
Jeff, Craig?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to come at this, but particularly for us, what we do is part of our knowledge packet and assessment process includes the concept of were there any issues? If so, were any new knowledge packets generated? That sort of thing. You can make the knowledge you're provisioning into the process be procedural as well as, you know, specific, detailed, dimensional, yes, no, whatever it is. The other way of coming at this is way earlier in the slides. Jeff Moffa showed some views that show the knowledge packets interconnecting into different systems. So there are ways to, you know, through use of APIs to interconnect knowledge packets into other tools to ensure that appropriate checks have taken place at different points in the process. That depends on what QMS system you're talking about and how exactly you would implement that.
Yeah, I want to add to that. There's one other aspect we haven't spent too much time on, and it's your organizational structure. So that fourth step, right, where we learn and adapt, you know, you need a team structure that is the center of that area. So for a car company, you could think of a body team, right? They're worried about the body of the vehicle. So that you need an organizational structure of these, what we call them, system management teams, and that's been in the textbooks for decades, right? But the team is responsible for learning and importantly the adaptive step, right? So refine the knowledge packets to go forward. So I think you know, you have an active process of knowledge management, but you need to ask yourself, well, who's the authority? Who's the organizational entity that decides that packet is now stale and needs to be either removed or updated, and here's a brand new piece of knowledge? That's how you interact with the networks. I have run into this before where people think, well, if I just have the perfectly designed processes and workflows, everything will happen automatically. Frankly, that's a bit naive. That's not the way we learn, right? We learn through experts getting together that have a shared practice, you know, the way they go about thinking, the way they go about problem solving. And those experts tend to be either physics-based, how does energy flow, how do we manage heat or whatever, or they're manufacturing-based, how do we build a body of a car, right, or a truck. And so however you decide to organize, and you will decide based on your market you're in, you'll organize a certain way. However you decide to organize, I would make sure there's manufacturing people there, designers there, and the knowledge management folks, right? Some people call them oak trees, some people call them the chiefs or the senior engineers, but the point is, those are the people that make up the team. They have a job, which is adapt the knowledge, right? Make it current, and for sure prune it now and then. Just like a tree, sometimes you got dead limbs, you need to take them out, right? And that's an important job. You wouldn't do that in the middle of a program. You got to do that independent of a program, right? So pruning is just as important as creating.
If I may add a very practical answer to that question about tools and integration and tools specific systems, we didn't really talk about it, but tying a document to a tool like a CA experiment or a quality management system or a CAD system does very little for you, right? It puts the knowledge where someone might trip over it in the document, they read it, but what happens? Right. What's important to understand about the knowledge aware approach is that knowledge packets can interact, you know, if the knowledge packet has been authored correctly, interact directly with these model environments. So how do you integrate them? There's some very basic steps to do that. Where the knowledge packets can manifest themselves inside of a CAD model as a rule check, as a parametric constraint, and inform and instruct the design team, the designer, the engineer, the design review process while they're looking at that model. And as all of our engineering processes become model-based, you know, CAD's just the easy one to see, that's a model, but they're all model-based. A PLM BOM is a model. It has context, it has attributes, and we can take an assessment control, tie it, it's an integration point to a PLM system and to a BOM object in the PLM system, and then have that interaction be very real, very active. As the attributes change, the provision knowledge change. The status of the knowledge packet can change because the parameters of the attributes have changed. And so I don't want to gloss over this a very important point that's here, is that there's a very practical integration between tools, specific tools, especially model-based tools, and the knowledge-aware process. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why I say knowledge-aware isn't just a nice thing to know about, it's happening. Because the approach to model-based everything is going to demand that knowledge be elevated into a structure that is discernible, decodable by these model-based environments. And knowledge-aware is specifically a prescription on how to do that. That might have been really long-winded, I'm sorry.
No worries. All right, I know we're not gonna be able to get to all the questions. I have one last question we can ask the group. They wanted to know, how long have each of you been using the knowledge-aware Auros system? To be able to, since you talked about all the where your projects were and the workflows and stuff like that. So
at our company, it started before I became aware of it, but I would guess, and I guess Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but 20 plus years. I mean, what's interesting to look at is the growth over time, right? Is we went from a few guys in the particular powertrain thing. I don't want to talk the details. And by and large, over that first 5 years, it grew within the design community, the people doing mechanical engineering. But soon after that, you know, we picked up a couple other very different functions. And then this whole thing about organic growth took over, right? Other people said, oh, I don't like doing requirements that way. And I said, well, they're not really requirements, they're really constraints. We talked about that earlier. And then the next thing you know, they're starting to use knowledge aware. So at least 2 decades. And my personal involvement is, it's about 15 years. So.
Yeah, Navistar for us, it's about 7 years. So we got the software and the approach in 2013, and have just had it continue to grow from then. I had someone a while ago say, well, tell me what all systems you're going to replace with this. And at the moment, there's not a good way of answering that, because it really depends on the continued growth of the software and user adoption in the organization.
Well, that is all the time we have for questions today. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, gentlemen, once again. That was a great presentation and discussion.
You're welcome.
Just a couple of next steps. So there is the white paper that Jeff mentioned, as well as some additional research we have on this topic of process, knowledge, and how they interact. You can also stay up to date on our research agenda, and if you have any more information to share, please reach out at any time. I also want to remind you that you will receive a copy of the recording and the slides in the next couple of days. And please feel free to check out any of our social media pages and stay engaged. Thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everybody.